Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. First thing here. This session on statewide data, we have a panel. I'm going to give an overview first to set it up. Then I have some questions I'm going to pose to the panelists. And then I want to reserve time for some questions and answers back and forth with you. We're looking for suggestions for improvements in data quality, improvements in process, improvements in ease of access. We're looking for your insights on the value of statewide data, and we'll talk a little bit about getting involved in some of these statewide data sets. So, statewide data sets. What we're looking for here in terms of quality is consistency, data standardized across counties, for example, and regions. So you're getting the same thing anywhere in the state. Efficiency, data that can be analyzed comprehensively. You do queries across county boundaries. Don't want to be restricted there. State data also, we want to be trusted data documented, well documented from state and local government sources, so you know what you're getting. And of course, we're trying to support everyone's capability to do more in less time. and more. So, statewide acquisition and investment. Some of our statewide data, the state acquires, collects, invest in that directly. I'm thinking first and foremost of orthoimagery. We're on a 4-year cycle. We have 2018 imagery services published for the northern Piedmont and mountains. The southern Piedmont Mountains region is being acquired right now as we speak, probably not today because of the clouds. But that's going to be published in late 2019. We have elevation statewide, the LIDAR. We have legacy LIDAR statewide, and we have also 4 or 5 phases of new LIDAR that's completed and downloadable. This phase 5, the furthest west, is in progress. So that was a state investment in partnership with the federal government. We have geodetic control statewide, including a network of continuously operating reference systems. Streams, there's a statewide update in progress funded by NC Department of Transportation. So we're in good shape on those data sets. We also have statewide data that's an aggregation of local data. I'm thinking of all public roads. Data is standardized for state and local roads and updated quarterly. So this is a compilation statewide of the state system and local roads. Parcels. 2018 is complete. The spring 2019 is coming up. Parcels are standardized, have standardized fields so that anywhere in the state you're getting the same attribute information for the parcel polygons. Governmental boundaries, county and municipal boundaries are updated by state agencies on an annual basis. We're doing more work on the municipal side. In addresses, we've had 2 snapshots of statewide addresses in 2009 and 2014. Updates are planned on that too. But those rely on all the county and city governments participating and sharing data so it can be aggregated into a statewide data set. How do we get access to these data sets? NC OneMap is a first stop for statewide data. Web services and applications. GoNC is NC Department of Transportation's good gateway to data maps and map services. Environmental data is served by the Department of Environmental Quality now through an open data online application for services and custom applications. Also, spatial data download, NC emergency management data sets related to LIDAR and elevation. So I want to introduce our panelists today. We have John Farley. He is the chair of the State Government GIS Users Committee. He's also the GIS manager for DIT Transportation in the Department of Transportation. Rich Elkins is the manager for the Land Records Management Program. He also has county government experience we're going to be tapping into here today. Jason Clodfelter is ill this morning. He sends his apologies. He could not be with us. But we do have Kat Clifton, former chair of the local government committee. Jason's the current chair. She is also GIS analyst with Davidson County now. So I'm going to pose some questions to the panelists about challenges and opportunities, and then we'll get to some questions and answers. So first, what are the biggest challenges for local data maintenance? I'm thinking of roads and parcels, addresses, jurisdictional boundaries. What are some of your experiences with the biggest challenges in maintaining those?
So, Jeff, thankfully, having been in GIS for going on 20 years now, it's been nice to see the progress that's been made toward the statewide parcel data set. So I'm thinking back even 5 years ago, and this was a dream. And now, here we are, and we're in our second round of those updates. So I'd say that the statewide parcels, we maintain at Davidson, basically, if it's recorded on a Friday, then next week it's in the system and so forth. And it's been developed in such a way that we can continue to maintain our data with our attributes and not interrupt any of our local services, but it can then be transformed by simply uploading it to the cloud and performing that transformation, which thankfully the way that the state project was developed, you help each county with a recipe, if you will, of which fields match to the state standard. And once you set that up, as long as there's not a change on the county side, then all you have to do is to remember to upload it with quarterly or at least twice a year, and shoot you an email to do that transformation. So that's made it very easy for counties. So the next steps have to do with doing the same type of updates for streets and addresses. And so what I'd like to see is some established and standardized update procedures for streets and local addresses, because especially with the LUCA project for the upcoming 2020 census, Davidson County, at least, has put quite a bit of effort into the maintenance of their street data, and we'd like to see that reflected at the state level.
Mm-hmm. In terms of local maintenance of data, what's the hardest data set to keep up to date?
Well, there are a lot of moving parts with addresses. So, and that's actually a new data set for us. Previously, situs address information was maintained as an attribute of our parcel data, and that information is very good. But we also had address information that was being maintained in the E911 system, as well as address information that was just free-form that could be collected in a number of different departments. So I attended a session yesterday about the master address repository, and if you didn't get a chance to see that, of course, go check out the recording. But that's an example of where we'd like to be. So moving toward that, where you have one authoritative address source with unique address IDs that can then trickle back to our other systems. And so we need to work on that integration locally across our departments.
Okay. While you have the mic, how about what are the challenges in data distribution?
Well, lots of times I'll get calls for parcel information or address information and so forth, and I have to politely remind them that, number one, that information is already available on our website for download.
Okay.
Or if they're looking for information for our county as well as other neighboring counties, then I point them to NC1 Map. And I don't just tell them NC1map.com. I actually have a little cheat sheet for myself where I have the URL that takes them directly to the link about the parcel data. So I inquire of their email address and send that to them and tell them about the history of the project and how often it's updated, and if they're working on a project, say regionally or something like that, then, and if they need updates, then we can reach out to the counties and have them perform a refresh prior to the initiation of that project.
Okay. But you have lots of data sets available online for download?
We currently have a limited number of data sets online, but anticipate more. And after the final update with the streets and addresses that I'm performing now, I would anticipate that we'd be providing more data. It'd be nice after we move to 10.6 to have a portal that people could access. So I think that's in the works.
Okay. Rich, maybe you could give some insight. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you could give some insight in your county experience on some of the challenges of maintaining data locally.
Well, I worked in small counties and also in a medium-sized county, and honestly, when you're in a small county, you think you're at the disadvantage, but honestly, when you're in a small county and you're controlling all the different data sets and you don't have to rely on somebody else, the hardest thing to keep updated is the thing that you're not in control of and some other department, and you're waiting for them to get it done. So it was a kind of a shock going from a small county to a bigger county and noticing, oh, well, this road isn't quite right, and not being able to actually fix it yourself. When it came to as far as data distribution, I was always a big advocate of free data downloads on our website because, for one, I was a GIS office of one. The more I could get people to take care of something themselves and download it from the website, as opposed to me having to deal with data licensing and burning stuff to a disk and all that kind of thing, it took it off my hands and made my job easier. So, and another thing that I would always advocate for, and this is something that your county commissioners are going to listen to, it's a economic development tool, making that data available so that people who are looking to relocate to your municipality or county and can get that data easily and don't have to jump through a lot of hoops, that's a way to show them that you are open-minded, welcoming, and want them, as opposed to, oh, well, that's going to be $200 for that layer, and why? I mean, it's a tool. It's already paid for by the taxpayers. So the ones that, I mean, if you actually have to do some work to generate it, something specific for a particular request, that's one thing. But if it's just stuff that is going to be commonly asked for, make it freely available. Did I answer all your questions?
Yeah. Any particular opportunities that you see coming up based on technology available and data available and so forth?
I don't know, but the biggest change and the biggest advantage that I have seen that came was statewide orthos. That was a game changer for us, especially when you work in a small, poor, local, small county where, your orthos may be 8 years old, 10 years old, to have that reliability that that you're going to get updates on a regular basis and that it's not going to take an act of Congress or your local or your county commissioners having to be begged for years and years to fund it, that it's a game changer and helps us keep our data so much more accurate.
Okay, Rich or Kat, part of data maintenance is maintaining valid metadata.
How much did Linda pay?
Linda Wayne is one of the great advocates, and I am too, and I know some of you are, but metadata is part of the challenge of local data maintenance, getting compliant metadata to begin with and then maintaining it. But any insights there to share?
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. So yes, metadata is it should be part of the process. However, unfortunately, it often isn't. And I think that harkens back to the do more with less, and that gets pushed further and further down the list of things to do. However, I will say, having come to Davidson County just 3 years ago, that's really important. The folks who are there, who developed the information, may not always be there. And so I'm taking this opportunity as a fairly new county employee to interview and ask about data sets and do more as far as the documentation. And that's actually a nice respite from working on streets and addresses all day. So metadata as a calming influence, I guess, for data development. So,
how about
Linda,
that?
was that good enough? I'm just asking. Okay. The Zen of metadata. There we go.
Calming influence, the Zen of metadata. That's great.
And I'm jumping out of order a little bit, Jeff, but I will say
Yes.
Challenges. One of the challenges about statewide data sets has actually been making a number of different potential user groups of the data sets aware of their existence. So, for instance, I was involved in a regional project that was being done by a COG, and one of the initial setups, preliminary meetings was, hey, we've got to get this data from 9 different counties, who's going to contact them, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to unmute myself and say, hey guys, there's statewide data. Were you aware of that? And there was some general mumbling on the other end of the phone, and they're like, no, we weren't aware of that. So, again, somehow we need to get the word out, get more people drinking the Kool-Aid about statewide data sets. But what was really nice about that was once they were aware of that, and we knew that they needed a refresh of that data, and they needed it for, I believe it was July 1st, then Jeff, you contacted the counties that were involved in that project, and they updated their parcels on the NC1 map, and they had it. They could easily go get that, and it was all in the same format, and imagine that. And it was so much easier. It cut down, they revised their timeline. It cut down their data collection as well as transformation of that data to next to nothing time-wise. So they were able to then get into the meat of the project. And it had metadata, yes.
So these were transportation planners who are not on the GIS listserv, or they're probably not here at the conference, but so they didn't have a way to discover it easily.
Yeah, so we need to get that out there, get the word out there. I know that I'm on about 10 different listservs, and so when I see a question come across one of those that might touch on the usefulness of a statewide data set and so forth, then I make sure to mention that. So
Good point. All right. Yes, Chris, let's have...
Yeah, so the...
Oh, hold on.
for the recording.
So I'm from Orange County, and we update the parcels through the state, twice a year. The center lines and the address points. Is there a program put in place to mimic the parcel updates? You said 2014 was the last time there was a statewide. The attributes being the same as like the parcels. What's the plans for that?
Okay, well, let's get into the state investments, and I think this will come out. That's a good question. John, I wanted to start talking about the data sets the state invests in statewide, like the imagery, LiDAR, and so forth. What are the challenges there with contractors involved and so forth?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit. It's not too many years ago that the biggest challenge is that we were all, speaking for state agencies, all doing the same things, collecting the same data, calling the same people in local jurisdictions, which is sort of annoying to local jurisdictions. But working together, we got that now. We had 3 different agencies that were maintaining Centerline. We got to have that down to 1 now. And incorporating local data, as you can imagine, it's, we have 100 different counties plus all the municipalities, and you have to integrate that into a fabric. And it's all different data models, different times of updates, and there are actual counties that do not have any GIS. They don't have any data. So that's been one of the biggest challenges. We have a process now. I actually have someone on my staff whose primary responsibility is collecting that information and getting it ready for integration in with the statewide Centerline data set. There is something near term that's a game changer, Next Gen 911. You might have heard of it. The challenge we're going to have there is incorporating that process into the overall state process, if you will, for Centerline, because the Next Gen needs that same information. They need address ranges. Address NCs tied into that effort as well. The initial implementation of it is going to geocode against ranges. And eventually we hope that it'll be situs address as we get down the road a little bit. But their requirements are a little bit different than some others, especially in terms of how frequently it has to be updated. But we really want to work to get that in, so at least at the state level, again, we're working with local jurisdictions, the same people we're working with now, and over 85%, it was one of the surveys from NextGen, 85% of the PSAPs, those are the folks that get the calls, over 85% of them, they used some other local GIS group to do their GIS support, same groups that we call or get our data from. So it's folding that into how we're going to implement NextGen. We're going to be awarding a contract here, or it's been awarded. I guess they're going to announce it, I think, next week. But our next big challenge is then working with them again to make sure that we can have it, focus our resources so we're not duplicating the data and make it as good as possible. And I think this is going to really improve because their update cycle is a lot faster. So the processes that we're going to need to put in place, and we have a lot of resources already that we have, at least at DOT, I've got 6 or 7 folks full-time updating data every day. And that's not including the person that's does the local data to get it ready to hand off to those other analysts to incorporate into the Centerline data set. So it's being actually updated daily. We publish it quarterly. Because there's a lot of derivative product, I'm hoping in the near term we will start publishing a service so you get the latest, greatest data. We're generally no more than 2 months out from we put the road into the system as soon as it's open to traffic. Used to be years ago until the last contract was signed, which could have been years after the road was open to traffic because we were arguing over a mowing contract. So that was another big change. From a technical standpoint, I'm sure most of you know, it's the edge matching. It's one of the biggest pains. You can't just drop it in there. And some opportunities. Rule-based engines are becoming more mature and more popular, like One Spatial, and that really helps when it comes to building in your business rules as to when and where to snap. Did I answer the question?
I think, yeah, Chris, we got to at least the roads. I mean, DOT has a statewide collection right now, but road center lines and addresses are two of the required data sets for next generation 911.
Right, and the state before NextGen, actually NextGen was one of the drivers for it, as well as the U.S. Census. The legislature requested of us to do an address NC to maintain a address data set for the state of North Carolina, and since obviously, as Jeff just mentioned, that's a big part of NextGen. Again, there's an opportunity there. There's a lot of money and resources going into that. So, how can we make that so that we don't have a separate one over here and a separate one over here and two different folks doing that instead of one central with those resources going to maintaining the best address data set available. Since that started a couple years ago, there's been a lot more advances, I think, from COTS vendors for data. They've invested a ton of money in building out their CITES addresses. So I think it's going to be interesting for us to take a look at those and see how they compare. The other thing is, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If someone's out there doing it and you can get the right licensing, that may and they are willing to accept your updates on the cycle that you want, that might be a better way to go. So I think that's an opportunity to look at some of work that's going on now that we may not have had a year or two ago. Even, stuff changes fast.
Okay, Rich, I think has a couple comments there.
Building on that and also going back, one of the challenges working for local government was oftentimes getting duplicate requests for the same thing from different people who, at least at the local level, you expect would be working together. Like if you're, just because you don't really necessarily think about it. It's like, this is Department of Revenue and they're completely separate from Department of Insurance or something. And that's why they're maintaining separate things and asking me for the same data. So that was kind of a challenge. And it's also relates to one of the big initiatives we have right now in the Secretary of State's office that we've been working with the working group for municipal boundaries. Currently, municipal, and if you came to my annexations workshop on Wednesday, you heard a lot about this, but municipalities maintain their own boundaries. The counties are maintaining the boundaries. Then you've got at least 4 or 5 different state departments who are maintaining that same data. And then you've also got the Census Bureau. And when you take those different layers and overlay them, you find missing things that are misaligned, that kind of thing. So one of the big things we're working on now is a pilot project where we're actually going to try and have a single collection of, once we establish a base municipal boundaries layer, then we're going to request updates for that. So each time there's an annexation or a de-annexation, getting the proper documents and the geospatial data that would then be maintained in a official state layer used by all departments in the state, as long as they agree. We can't always force everybody, but this would be the official one. And so things that where when questions come up about your funding, and it's based on population and whether or not something's inside or outside, there would actually be one authoritative resource at least used by all the state agencies, and there wouldn't be as much question. And maintaining that, would be a thing where you're sending the updates to the state and we update it, rather than keeping on asking you on a periodic basis whether there have been changes or not, and having to use change detection algorithms to find where those changes were. You're just sending the changes.
I will also say that there has been a noticeable change in legislation. years ago, one of the reasons the municipal boundaries are done multiple times is because certain laws are required, like DOT is required to do it for funding. The Office of State is required to do it for records. I mean, and even if we got around the table and said, yeah, let's do this, there's still legislation requiring these things. So one of the things that the group's working on is getting legislation together to make it consistent across the state. I think nowadays, more and more when you see legislation that pertains to information at the state level, the legislature's thinking in terms of authoritative source, of doing that, and even designating an agency sometimes to lead an effort. State property comes to mind for the new State Property Data Initiative. And as a GIS community, especially at the state level, it's a very good group, and the SCUC, the group that Jeff referred to, that I chair, meets very regularly and talks about these things. We know who to talk to. We know who to pick up the phone and say. And our first thought is generally not how do we recreate this data or reinvent it, but who to call to see if it's being done. And if other people need it, I mean, even we're at the point now where we don't even just run off and do it. If we know we have to have this data and no one's doing it, we'll talk to each other and say, okay, if you need it, maybe we can, add that at no additional cost, or maybe you want to include that and, kind of help chip in for it.
Any other thoughts on those statewide projects like orthoimagery, where it's state investment?
Oh, that's
and
that's
management.
One of those.
Yeah,
that's one of those. It's really hard to define the total benefit to the state, and it is tremendous. We use it, and that's one of our primary sources of data in DOT. They don't always report to us when roads change, and there's parts of the state that we haven't touched in probably 20, 30 years, but the imagery will pick it up. So when we go into an area to add a project or make a change, if we see that the imagery shows something different than what we have, we actually use that to modify and change the data. If we didn't have that, we'd be using a combination of things probably, but certainly not at the level of detail that we have now. And it's consistent border to border. You're not having to stitch things together. So that and that's hard to put a monetary value on, but it has definitely helped improve, at least obviously from a DOT standpoint. But from a state, I think we spend $12 million a year, something like that.
that's right.
For the imagery. But if you added up every jurisdiction in the state that would be flying it on their own, you would far surpass that.
Good point.
It was also kind of alluded to in when Jeff was talking about collection of elevation data, but I thought really a big statewide effort that really needs to get a lot of credit is statewide floodplain mapping, and how good of data we have in this state compared especially to a lot of other states. So,
yeah, we were the first state in the country to be able to do our own floodplain maps. Usually FEMA creates those maps, and we were the first to do it and create them ourselves. And we're one of the first to fly LiDAR border to border around 2000 timeframe. And we're just now finishing up a new flight. Of course, halfway through that project, the instrumentation took a major leap forward in technology. So we're struggling with that, and we're not even sure what kind of product we can derive from it. It's still, it's that new. But we have it, and it's in North Carolina. So, we have a lot. This is a rich, rich state for data.
Open it up a little bit here. I want to open it up to you, the floor here for comments, observations, corrections, if we misstated anything. Yes, Kevin. And hold on so we can get this on the recording.
Hey, for a few years, I was a producer and distributor of data at the county level. Since I've gone to the electric co-op world, I'm more of a user on a regional basis. So I can really see the value in being able to go to a website like NC1 Map and getting parcels for 7 different counties that I don't have to call all those counties. So that's an enormous benefit. The only thing I would say is I would encourage everybody to keep those updated. I know it doesn't just happen. It does take some effort to do, but I do encourage others to make sure that's kept up.
Okay. Oh.
I've got comments and questions and stuff. So first comment is I'm thankful for our data being out there on NC1 parcels. Helps me tremendously from request. I try to do it about twice a year, but another communication would be helpful with the assessor's office and the fact that that information is important to others. I think we get a hold up a lot of time from their data because values are secret until the bills go out, stuff like that. So they're does anyone else have that problem? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So it's kind of like they only want to release that data once a year. So, and I think we work through that where we get everything else but the value. And so I don't have to call those requests. We have a link on our GIS data download page to say, go here for additional parcel data, because all I distribute is owner address. That register of deed information is all that you can download on our site for parcels. But when you want the extra data, we've got a link that goes directly to the NC parcel page. So that's very helpful to me. Very thankful for that. Also, some questions. You were talking about the next Gen 911 and the centerline information for there. A few years ago, they said that they were going to build a centerline data set just for next Gen 911. Is that in the process of being done? Is that part of what y'all do with the quarterly downloads? It's not. I'm not holding it close. Oh.
Be right back.
That's a great question. No, it is not. On the next gen side, is not being built because the contract hasn't been signed yet. The plan is to once that's awarded, we're going to have a complementary effort to look at how we're going to integrate that with the rest of the state. So they're going to use the existing state data to sort of prime the pump, if you will, and then there may be some duplicative processes in place to start. But the plan is to get that to a point where, again, there's one authoritative source being maintained in one place that's published to everybody. So the short answer is no, it has not started yet. The longer term answer is it's going to evolve over time as we start bringing these systems together.
Linda, you had another question?
And I guess a related question to that is the fact that everybody's representation of their county boundary is different. And, where do we know to stop? What's the official county boundary line? So that's kind of, especially for next year, and I want to know where I'm supposed to start, where I'm supposed to stop.
So the state actually has an official county boundary. The North Carolina Geodetic Survey, Gary Thompson's group, took that over from DOT a few years back because we used to maintain the county boundaries as we needed it to know where to start and stop things. And they are the official keepers of that information to begin with. So when there's a disagreement among counties as to where the line is, and I will tell you that the majority of lines in this state are not officially designated. They're based, to answer your question, if there is no legal description other than you follow this river, or it's, if you go to that rock and turn right, and there's a lot of description still left to do that, but it's never been an issue. when someone builds a subdivision or starts doing some development, then it becomes an issue because who's going to tax that? And that's generally when they'll get involved and go out and actually do a survey based on historic record. And there's a whole process if the counties can't come to consensus, but eventually it goes to the legislature for final approval. And the NGS publishes as a service county boundaries. They also publishing the renewed state boundary with South Carolina. And they have already started the process to better define the boundary with Virginia. So they're, over the next few years, you might hear about some of that moving back and forth. As far as next gen, we'll be working with the vendor to make sure they're using the most authoritative data because it's the counties. Next gen folk, they want to go right to the PSAP and you give us the information. Well, the PSAP might not be the authoritative source for that information like county boundary. It's the state legislature that sets those. And so it's already done statewide. So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel or stitch anything together. We work with them to make sure they're using the most authoritative data and those would be those county boundaries. And if you have any questions about your boundary, Gary's group is the ones to reach out to.
Just like our parcel maps in GIS, the only way to legally determine where a line lies on the ground is to have a licensed surveyor go out and locate it. So while you may opt in your tax office, you're operating under your parcel lines, but your parcel lines are just your best representation of where that property line is. They are not authoritative unless it's actually a surveyed line. At the same way, there's a lot of county lines that are not, that we have a description and somebody put it into the GIS and maybe your county has put it into their GIS and the adjoining county put it into theirs and they don't agree. That happens. The only way to determine which one or neither is real is to have Gary's group come out and locate it. And they will only do that if both counties request it. And you need to get if you have a disputed county boundary, you need to go ahead and work with that adjoining county. Get on the list because there's a waiting list. They only have a certain amount of funding to do these surveys each year, and they can only do as much as they have money for. And so the sooner you get on that list, the sooner they can get to you. But as far as he's saying, with the authoritative, that's the best available information, and that's the data that the state is operating under until we get better information.
So just to build on that a little bit, so you have the authoritative, county boundaries. Is that been intersected with the center line so that there's node points that differentiate that, that break that center line so that the county will know what to address? That's one. And then the other is there any state program to help the local jurisdictions with the addressing effort, or is that going to be the responsibility of the state?
So Address NC was conceived to work with locals. It's not, we want to aggregate it, make it a statewide data set, but that wasn't meant to be done in a vacuum. We don't have the resources like here or even Google, I think, has one now that has those data sets that, are for situs addressing. So it's not meant to be done just like I said by ourselves in the state. As far as the center line, unfortunately, no, because most of the boundaries in the state have not been surveyed. So where that boundary line is and the center line, sometimes you have a road that goes in and out. And just like with property boundary, tax properties, there's agreements generally with those jurisdictions as to who does what. Because you can shake someone's hand and say, we'll take this, you take that. Not supposed to do that. Okay, don't do it. But I mean, that's like Rich was saying. It's, if you're going to be waiting a couple years to have a surveyor come in and do it, to make it official, most of the boundaries are not done that way. These are boundaries that were set up using methods, 100 years ago, that are not necessarily authoritative, although that becomes the primary source for the new survey boundary. And once it's designated, then both jurisdictions, and I think in most cases the legislature has to sign off on it. Legislature always does if both jurisdictions are on board. It's a pretty easy one.
As long as both jurisdictions adopt the map, then it doesn't necessarily have to go through. If there's some question as to whether or not that boundary is the original boundary, as opposed to being an agreed boundary, if there is any possibility of that it's not the original boundary and that there is some change, that would have to go through. And sometimes they'll go through and get, if they end up not coming to agreement, either the legislature or the courts can make the decision. We've got one situation where two adjoining counties had their boundary surveyed more than 10 years ago, and one county has accepted it, but the other county, which is losing some land, and thinks it's like, well, we're a small county. Why are we losing land to this big county that's taking away from our tax base? So they're figuring, well, maybe we can go to court and maybe they'll, split the difference. And that's not going to be how it works. And they're going to end up, if they do, they're probably going to spend a lot more money in the end with legal fees and things like that. And going to come out in the end that it's going to be the state's evidence is evidence, and their tax maps are not a legal boundary. So there are situations where the legislature can come into it.
Back to your question about addresses, I would encourage you that if you have not already done this, to get address information from all the various county departments that you have, if you're with a county or even with a city, and work toward that master address repository. It might be the project that nobody really wants because it is overwhelming. I've been working on streets and addresses now, I guess, probably the last 18 months. I do other projects, not just that, but that's a primary one because it is so important. So again, moving toward that where the entire county or city is working off of the same address information, you'll see cost savings year over year. You'll see improved efficiencies. You may have discoveries that occur to bring in additional tax revenue. We've seen that already. So especially with the new orthos, we've seen in doing this project, we've seen mysterious additions being added to homes, or there's a lot of cars parked around that. Oh, they opened a garage in their backyard, that kind of thing. So it's valuable in a number of ways, but it'll be even more, the value will be seen more as well with the move toward Next Gen 911.
Okay.
Morning, I'm Scott Gregory with Wildlands Engineering, and I work in the private sector, and a couple things. The statewide data has just been tremendous for us, mainly for me, but the 60 other employees that I work with. I'm in the process of centralizing a lot of our data. We look for stream and wetland mitigation sites, mainly North Carolina, but we have 5 offices that overlap efforts, and this whole idea of downloading static data sets in separate offices and people looking for the same sites, it has just been unwieldy, like in terms of data management. So the statewide parcels, as you mentioned, is a huge game changer for pursuing landowners and stuff. But the other data set, and I think one of you guys mentioned it, was the possibility of like a more detailed hydro layer. And that's one of our critical decision-making data sets, especially because when we look for mitigation sites, the low-hanging fruit tends to be pastures, landowners that have lots of land, pastures, denuded buffers, but forested sites, believe it or not, depending on the historical background in forested areas, have a lot of erosion and stuff and can be, pursued as mitigation sites. So, but the stream centerline helps with that. So I did hear that I think DOT might be generating a new one. Is that, do you know if that's possible with the new LiDAR?
Yes, I guess would be the short answer. It's actually an initiative with multiple agencies working together because we need them just as bad as DEQ as others. So there is an initiative, and the stream maps are problematic and how they've been defined over years. Just taken off a quad sheet, and and because of certain rules, even though we had more accurate data, we couldn't use it. And I think that's changing with this working group that's going through and really taking a look at it, so that we can, first of all, not only have change the laws if need be to get a more accurate data set and be able to publish that as the authoritative source. So yes, we're working on that. I think there's another agency. I hope I'm not missing somebody, but DOT and DEQ are definitely working on it.
Yeah, good point. Also made me think, are you using web services as well? Yes. So that's been an improvement since even 2 years ago. There are many more data sets that are available as web map services and web feature services, where you don't have to wonder if you're getting the latest. You are getting the latest that's been published. There's lots of transportation data. The parcels is another one. And I want to point out that John mentioned the hydrography working group. There are working groups under the council for all these major data sets, for parcels, for roads and transportation, for hydro, for the ortho imagery and elevation. So if you have interest and want to be one of the voices of stakeholders, I'd encourage you to get in touch. You can get in touch with me. I can tell you what's available and where you might be able to plug in to help make this really a true statewide effort. Any other questions or comments? We've got about a minute left here.
I have a comment. Going back to Tuesday, there was a lot of talk about Florence. There was a panel. We had the plenary. Mm-hmm. One of the big lessons from Florence, when you have an emergency like that, weaknesses in your process or system get exacerbated, and it really shines a light on them. And knowing the authoritative source of there's a ton of data out there. Which stream data set should I use? What's the best for the purpose I need it for? That's the hard part, and that comes back to data management. And the state has started at a statewide level and is working with agencies on an enterprise data management. And that data is data. So GIS is part of that. It's not, and we're not unique in that this is GIS or this is tabular data or spatial data. It's all data, and it all needs to be managed. And you need to know where to go to get it, and is this the right data set I need to do the job I need to do. And you'll see more and more of that in the coming year.
That's a good way to wrap up. Let's thank our panelists, Rich Elkins, John Farley, and Kat Clifton.